the Eastern Progress, and today the Society of Professional Journalists and the Communications Department at EKU will be hosting a panel of professional journalists. This panel is known as the Guardians of Kentucky, and they will be kicking off First Amendment Week today, discussing opposition in their workplace and how they protect their First Amendment rights.
Hi guys, I'm Colin Overton. I'm Editor-in-Chief of The Progress and President of the SPJ chapter of EKU. I just want to thank you guys for coming out to this panel today. We should have some pretty interesting things to talk about and touch on some really good points on the state of journalism in the state. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to John Nelson. He's the Editorial Director for Landmark Community Newspapers, so he's a big face in Kentucky journalism, and I'm going to let him take things from here.
Thank you, Colin. Those of you who know me know that I never miss an opportunity to say something about the First Amendment, especially First Amendment Week. Before we get started with this austere panel, I want to tell a little story. About 20 years ago, I was in a rather intimate meeting of about a dozen editors from one company at the John Siegenthaler Center in Nashville. And Mr. Siegenthaler actually came over and had lunch with us. And in the room, he asked us how many of us knew the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. It took us far too long to name those 5 freedoms. How many in here can name them? You don't know. I would encourage you to read. I was tickled to death to see in this printout the staff editorial from the Progress staff that lists the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment: freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. That day, I decided that since people were going to accuse me as a journalist of hiding behind the First Amendment, I was going to decide that I knew what they were talking about, that it took us too long as editors of newspapers to know those freedoms, and so I began not to hide behind it, but to stand on it. I would encourage all of you in this time when you run into people who think that we have too much freedom in the First Amendment, to educate yourselves, especially if you're in our business, about what the First Amendment says and about the fact that it's not just for you, it's for everyone, and tell them why you stand on the First Amendment and not behind it. This panel stands on the First Amendment every day. I'll start at the end and introduce them one by one. On the far end is Jeff Vanderbeck, who is publisher and vice president of Appalachian Newspapers Incorporated. Jeff has more than 35 years in the marketing and advertising business. He has an extensive multimedia background in sales training, marketing, management, and advertising. Vanderbeck came into the newspaper business in 2001, selling advertising in a shopper, and worked his way to general manager and then publisher in 2007. In 2012, he started a paper in Mingo County, West Virginia, and in 2016, another in Floyd County. In 2017, he helped his company acquire 2 newspapers, one in Hazard and another in Prestonsburg, which was rolled into the Floyd County paper. In 2018, he rolled out the most extensive digital marketing platform available in the region. Currently, he oversees the operation of 5 newspapers, 1 regional shopper, a web press operation, and a digital marketing company that has customers throughout the U.S. Jeff lives in Pikeville with his wife, Tracy. He has 2 children, 1 son at Georgetown and 1 daughter at UK. Next to him is Miranda Combs. She's WKYT's award-winning investigative reporter and anchor. She's been part of the WKYT team since 2002. She's had anchor chairs alongside Sam Dick, Bill Bryant, and just about everyone else in the newsroom. She's been the station's investigative reporter since 2013. Miranda recently won an Emmy for her coverage of a car dealership fraudulently scamming more than 1,400 customers. She's also been awarded the Associated Press Reporter of the Year Award and recently won an Edward R. Murrow Award for Journalism Excellence. She and her husband have 2 young boys, 8-year-old Calvin and 5-year-old McCoy. Abigail Whitehouse graduated from Eastern Kentucky University in 2012 after earning her bachelor's degree in English with a concentration in creative writing. During her time here, she wrote numerous news and feature stories for the Eastern Progress. She then received a paid scholarship through the KPA, where she spent 10 weeks in Franklin, Kentucky as a staff writer, and after completing that internship worked as a staff writer for the Casey County News, and later became an editor of the weekly newspaper in Lincoln County, the Interior Journal, which I oversaw while I was in Danville. She's published several freelance articles and continues to report local news as freelance reporter for that newspaper. Most recently, she's been reporting local and regional news for the hometown radio station, WPBK-FM, during a daily 5 o'clock news segment. And she also was recently hired to work for me at Landmark Community Newspapers as a roving editor. She's a member of the Golden Dozen editorial writers in the Golden Quill Contest hosted each year by the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors. And last, but certainly not least, Rian Craig is a student media advisor at the University of Kentucky, the Kentucky Colonel student newspaper. He is also current owner of the Todd County Standard, which in 12 of the past 13 years has been judged the best small weekly in the newspaper in Kentucky, just by hair most of the time.
Win's a win.
He is also the 2017 winner of the Al Smith Award for Public Service through Community Journalism by a Kentuckian. His work received national attention when the Standard investigated the murder of a girl in foster care in a home where the abuse had been substantiated, and used open records laws to uncover serious flaws in the Kentucky social services system. The newspaper's investigation helped lead to the resignation of the cabinet secretary, the retirement of the social services commissioner, legislative hearings, and a governor-appointed panel to examine child abuse deaths and near deaths. Thank all of you for coming. I'd like each of you, starting with Jeff, if you would, to share with everyone a memorable encounter you may have had with an angry reader, advertiser, subject of a story, and in the process, tell us what it's like to be a journalist in a small town.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for having me here. It's a great privilege to talk to you all. When I read the question, several things popped up in my mind. I know this is only an hour and a half. I could probably take up about 4 hours of your time and not even scratch the surface. I've had a circuit judge threaten to shoot me, a mayor punch my editor, a city official come in and punch my reporter. I had another county official threaten to punch me at the grocery store, and the sushi guy came out from behind the sushi counter and asked me if he wanted to call 911. He had a cell phone and a cleaver in one hand. I had another lawyer who's now a judge. His father came and threatened to beat me up because we put his picture on the front page for appearing drunk in court. I had the son of a group of parents call me and threaten to come down and kill me at my office because we put his parents on the front page of the paper for dealing drugs, which was ironic because I asked the question. I said, were they dealing drugs? They go, oh yeah, but you didn't have to print it. I said, well, they had meth, right? Yeah, and they sold meth by the school, right? So everything that we printed is correct. Yeah, but you didn't have to call them out on it. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. That's your all's problem. I said, you all need to get counseling. And then I have a current sitting state representative who, my daughter at the time was probably 13 years old, and she was off for school, and we were having lunch at the local Mexican restaurant, and he didn't like something that we printed for whatever reason. We told the truth, so you'll find that the politicians don't like the truth. So what happened was he came up to me and he confronted me, and now he's 6'7", and he started poking his finger at me, and you know, I was with a group of people, my daughter was with me, and we were probably 9 or 10 folks around this round table, and he just did not like the fact that I was ignoring him. And I'm like, you know, if you really want to talk about this, you know, be professional and talk to me. This is, you know, well, I'm having my quesadilla, this is not the time to want to attack me. But if you want to go that route, let me know, because you know I've got plenty of witnesses here that saying that you're provoking me and you've actually touched me, and I've got a right to defend myself. And I know this is not a stand your ground state, but I could make it that way real quick. So going on, the most memorable one I think is the one I wrote a column, and as a columnist, these people, they don't like to hear the truth. We had a state representative who had owns a bunch of mines in the Phelps area of Kentucky, in Pike County, And there was a leak of what appeared to be what he considered it as dish soap, which is a cleansing detergent for the mines. Well, all of his records were stored at this gas station. And you know, in Pike County, things torch all the time. I mean, it's just, and then it's a miracle, it's an anomaly, nobody will ever know what's going on. Well, within 24 hours, it happened on a Sunday night about 10 o'clock, the gas station that held all this guy's records went up in smoke. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the fire marshal was there, deemed it an accident, the thing was gone, all the stuff was taken care of. Well, I wrote in my column that something stinks in Phelps because there was a bad smell, and I figured I'd use a play on words and talked about how, you know, this never happens. Well, that county official came up to me at the grocery store, and he got mad, and his veins were popping out, and it was, you know, his eyes, and he's spitting all over, and he's a pretty large guy, probably 6'4", 260 pounds, and madder than can be, just so mad that I printed the truth and said, there's something wrong here, and somebody needs to check this out. Well, subsequently, the representative is now doing, I think, 9 years in jail for bribing an official. And this guy, there's some other investigations going on, but people don't like the truth, and that happens on a regular basis. So what I question or what I would caution you on is, and the first thing I talk to reporters about when we hire them, we say, listen, when you hack somebody off, which will happen because when we tell the truth and we don't skirt the issues, be prepared for backlash. So that's what I tell our employees. It happens to me all the time. It happens to our employees all the time. It happens to my reporters all the time. One of my editors, he was finished a paper up on a Tuesday night, was watching the College World Series. The then mayor comes riding on a bicycle in a pair of cut-off jeans, shorts, and work boots, and one of those wife beaters, and came up and took a punch at him because he didn't like what was going in the paper tomorrow. I says, well, how did you know what was going in the paper? We did the research, we asked him questions, and he didn't like the questions that he asked, so he just wanted to punch somebody, so he did. And we settled out of court, which there was no money or anything charged, but the point is that he apologized profusely, and all we want to do is be left alone. So it could be dangerous if you allow it to be dangerous, and in a small community, you know, everybody knows everybody, and if you don't know what you're doing, there'll be a lot of people tell you what you're doing or make stories about you. Social media is the worst thing that we have. Thank God that Topics got destroyed and obliterated, because if you Google my name on Topics, I have done a lot of bad things, so which none of them are obviously true, but you'll find that out. So that's what's happening.
Now, the moral of that story is that if you work as an editor or a reporter in a small community, you see the people that you write about every day in the aisle at the grocery store or in the pew at the church, and so you be prepared for backlash and have the courage to stand by your word. Miranda, you got a story for us?
Yeah, sure. But first, to your point, I love being in church or anywhere and people saying, "Did you see that story on the?" And I'm like, "I was there. I did."
Yeah.
It's all even my babysitter does that, but I can't really follow a lot of that drama. Do you carry iPads with you?
Oh, I thought you meant a gun. Yes,
Oh, no,
I do carry a gun.
But not any sort of like, because I mean, I think our cameras are our best protection in a lot of those cases. Like,
Right.
someone's not going to come up and punch me when our camera's rolling, I don't think. But I will say, to your point on the social media, I think it has positives for us in regard to it can help us find people quick, but it also puts us at arm's length of people that we don't know, but they feel like they know us. I was going to read you a couple that I have gotten, and this is just in the past month or so. There's so many. The segment I saw was filled of lies. You did a terrible disservice to your viewers. You get you can't get high on Kratom. No one spends 60 days on Kratom. No one. Where do you find that person? And I just wrote back, rehab. But another one told me, you may be a very nice person. I don't know, but as a journalist, you stink. These are very typical. Please educate yourself. For the love of America, be effing truthful. So those literally are in the past 3 weeks probably. My sons have been threatened, which was probably the worst day of my life. I've been threatened. I've been followed to the place where we had to have police, retired police with me for a while after a lot of the Auto Plaza stories. We have a security system in our house that can't be beat. It puts my family through a lot. I'm always still afraid of the grocery store run-in, which I haven't had yet. Yeah, it's a frightening aspect. Probably the biggest one I've had when the drug epidemic was just getting started and just getting out into the public, there was the big debate about Suboxone and whether it was being abused or whether it was being helpful. And at that time, police were telling us across the state it was the most diverted drug in the state. So we went with the police department that said, go to this clinic, show up at 9 a.m., and you will see a line of people, and it'll look just like a pill mill from people from different states on their tags lined up to, you know, just standing there, and they'll come in and out. Well, sure enough, we pulled our van in and backed in and shot the video through the van of this line. Why did we not get out of the car? Well, if we got out of the car, we had changed the story, right? Because we'd be sitting right there with our camera and our tripod, and people would have dispersed. But I made this stupid mistake of taking a picture of my photographer shooting out the window. I would never do that again. That was like 5 years ago, or right when I started. So that got shared quite a bit, and you know, they were saying things like, why do you have to hide behind your car? You know, why can't you get out and face us? Which we did. After we got the video, we went out and interviewed people and asked, you know, how long they spent inside, were they getting the therapeutic attention that they need, and the story ended up well. But that one picture of my poor photographer, I'll never forget his mother calling me that night after it started spreading and said, I'm scared. And I was like, whoa, this is bigger than we think. This affects my photographer, it affects me, and we really have to pay attention and be careful about things like that. So it definitely is a learning medium to a degree, especially when it comes to investigative reporting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Abigail.
Well, speaking of grocery stores, I had to write a story about a eviction that turned out to be a very large methamphetamine drug bust, and the son that was involved happened to be the son of the local grocery store owner, who was our largest advertiser. And I received a phone call from the parents, who were the owners, and was told that the first words out of their mouth was, "We are your biggest advertiser," which was obviously a tactic to intimidate me, which did not work. And I had to write the story anyway, so I tried to explain to them why it was being written and why it would be unfair to leave their son out of the story while leaving someone else's son in the story. And after a while, they kind of got the idea, but that was the only big advertiser that I managed to piss off, I think. And another story I had, the most memorable, because it was actually the most scary situation for me. I wrote a story. I actually didn't write the story. I ran the story in the IJ, but the Frankfort State Journal had actually written the story. And it involved a Stanford man, which is where I report. So we ran it, and it was about him being robbed by two people. And he was upset because we included the information that led him to Frankfort, which was actually to pay for sex. So he wanted us to leave that part of the story out and just talk about how he was robbed. And I had to explain to him why we couldn't do that. And so first he started attacking our Facebook page, which is pretty standard. We get hateful comments all day long on there. But he was using cuss words and being really inappropriate and directly attacking me, calling me a fake news editor and all kinds of lovely things. So we blocked him from our Facebook. So then he found my email, and he started sending me emails saying, "I'm watching you." He sent me a creepy photo of a guy pointing through the screen saying, "I'm watching you." And at that point, I felt like I needed to alert local law enforcement, because I had heard rumors that the guy was actually possibly dangerous. So I let the local police know, and that's when one of the best things about community journalism is when you work with local cops, you get to know them pretty well, and they start to take care of you a little bit. So the local police started doing drive-bys. Whenever I was late at the office by myself, they would come by and turn their lights on and let me know that they're keeping an eye out for me. So that was probably the two biggest situations for me.
Okay, thank you. Ryan?
I grew up in Western Kentucky. The Todd County Standard newspaper, which I still own, is in Western Kentucky. But Todd County is very Appalachia-esque in the way it's a small place, all rural, mostly farmers. And I'll tell two more lighthearted death threats. Well, I had some, where they just give you the creepy voice on the phone, or, you get a nasty anonymous letter. We get those. I used to say we're probably doing our job because, we used to average 1 to 2 death threats a year. That's pretty good. So, but at one point, the sitting sheriff had, this is a long way around to tell this, had threatened to tase a handicapped man that had complained about him parking in a handicapped spot at Walmart in Russellville, Kentucky. Threatened to tase the guy. We ran a story, and we actually ran the 911 exchange, the entire thing, because we knew how he was. He would just call us liars. He went to the press, which is in town there, Elkton, Kentucky, and took a paper off of the press to see, I guess, how bad the damage was. Did not pay, just walked out. Just walked in, grabbed the paper, walked out. I called the Elkton police on him, and he did not like that. And basically, he was going down the hallway of the Todd County Courthouse, shucking his shotgun, saying he wasn't going to jail because Todd County Standard had called the police on him. And basically, as I explained to him, you couldn't walk in a grocery store at the time the paper was 75 cents and steal a can of beans and walk out the front door. Nobody would like that, and that's how I explained to him. So it kind of went down there. But, I mean, basically the sitting sheriff was gunning for me. For the rest of his term, I didn't drive by myself on a lone country road at night, just to be honest with you. And then one that's not as, it didn't turn out as bad, was completely terrifying. We had a guy that ran advertisements in our paper, and basically he was, you're probably all too young to remember, there's a song, where they say this guy is the Charlie Daniels of the torque wrench. Yeah, some of you might get that. Anyway, he's really good at what he does. This guy was the Charlie Daniels of growing pot. He was like, I mean, he was as good as it gets. And so basically, he had started coming in, throwing cash down on the table, and wanted to run advertisements about how smoking pot gets you closer to God. And he talked about the apocalypse was coming and all these things. And finally, his family came to him and said, look, he's completely off his meds. Now, he's self-medicating, but he's off his actual medication. And there was without a doubt, there was a time there I was like, well, you know, I've always felt like if someone comes in and it's not libelous or there's anything, but I felt like that because he probably wasn't in his right mind, we refused his next advertisement. He basically threatened everybody at that point and said, you're not going to believe what I'm going to do. So we thought he was just going to come kill us, just to be honest with you. So we put the paper out that night. One of the reasons I didn't get punched at the office a lot, I always had a big dog there. You'd be surprised what a big ugly dog can do. You know, actually, if someone come in and even raise their voice, she just sit in the corner and growl a little, and it really works. But we, you know, we had people there. I had a reporter that was, she really loved guns. We were very loaded. We put the paper out that night. The police called me a little after midnight and says, the man's name is, we arrested him just a little bit ago. And I'm like, really, what did he do? And they said, well, there was a church-wide revival that night. And when I mean a citywide revival, all the churches have a revival at once in their respective churches. And he went to each windshield of every car and put a little bag of pot on it. And at the Church of Christ, though, he put seeds. I don't know why. But anyway, I couldn't believe what he did. So honestly, we thought he was going to, you know, come murder all of us. Instead, he just wanted to give us some pot. So, but as the police pointed out, there were 400 or 500 bags he said he gave away, but they only collected 300. pause on that a minute. But anyway, those are two just interesting things. But I mean, one turned out to not be much, but I mean, you have to take every threat seriously. But just to tell this, he is back on his meds, and every time I'm in town, I see him at the local Greasy Spoon. We have breakfast together. So that's how it is in a small town.
Ryan comes from a journalism family, and his late uncle, Larry Craig, was, for us old-timers, was one of the best, very well known. He was a very colorful preacher turned journalist, but he was a very tough journalist. And I remember one time he came to the Kentucky Press Association meeting with his briefcase, and somebody asked him if he was going to run the meeting, and he opened his briefcase and pulled a gun and laid it on the table and said, "I guess I am." But he faced threats, and one story I think Ryan can share with us about him.
Well, I think the most famous one, he was putting the paper out one night. He had been writing about the mining communities there, and there was a mining strike, and he had been writing about that, and someone had shot into his office, had actually shot 4 or 5 bullets into his office. So instead of doing what most people do, he called the cops. His family actually came and stayed with my family for a little while because that was my uncle and his family, and got him out. Then he went and sat in a chair in the front by the window that was shot out all night with a gun, just basically waiting for him to come back. That's how he was. But he actually had other problems. He had a coal truck try to run him off the road and kill him. His church, where he was a preacher, he had preached against the Ku Klux Klan, not knowing, or maybe he did know, I never could get this out of him, that the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan of Kentucky was sitting in the crowd when he was preaching, and he called the Klan a bull on the butt of society. So they burned his church down. And they were able to catch these guys, and I think they're still in jail for it. So, but anyway, that's kind of the things when you speak the truth in a small town, that's what happens.
I've been through a few situations similar to what these journalists have described, and in the old days anyway, you could let a little time pass and it was over. 2 weeks, the minds of the people change, and everything that they were angry about just kind of fizzles. I don't think it's that way anymore. Jeff, can you elaborate on how long you have to deal with these kinds of
Well, you deal with the nut jobs for as long as they're nuts, which is a long time. So, and what I'd like to commend us all up here for, thank God we make over $1 million a year, because it really substantiates the threats, and it offsets the amount of threats that we get on a regular basis. You get talk about getting run off the side of the road. My son, when he was 15 years old, I was getting death threats. You might have heard of a Social Security lawyer named Eric Kahn, con artist. Well, he, wanted to do a whole bunch of things, and he would call my office, and then he would have people call my office and threaten me and threaten to burn crosses on my front yard. And he had one of his thugs come up to my house one time, and he didn't know that I was outside, nor did he know that I had my pistol in my pocket, because I'm from New Jersey and we carry pistols. And when you come to Kentucky, if you don't have one, they requisition one for you. Well, he come up my driveway, and I didn't know who he was, and he came out and he called me by my last name, and I pulled my pistol out. I pointed at him. I said, "Who are you?" And he told me who he's here for, and I said, "You tell so-and-so to go back." And I was using some expletives, and needless to say, I was getting phone calls at all hours of the night. So my son stands guard. At the time he was 15 or 14 years old, and he had his AR-15, and he's got his makeup on underneath, and like he's going to play football, and he's like, "Daddy, I'm going to protect the house, don't worry." I said, "AJ, go to bed. It's nothing's going to happen. I mean, the threats they're idle." Well, to answer your question, how long you deal with it? Well, either one, they go to a facility that helps them get better, like jail, or a rehabilitation center, or they die. I've had one guy who is no longer with us, but he was, or they really see the light and say, "You know what, maybe that was the best thing." The one person, his son was really bad off on alcohol, and I said, "If your child is that bad, you come to my office and you want to fight me, you leave my office." I said, "If I ever catch you around here again, I'll arrest you for trespassing. I want you to leave my office, go to his office right now, put your arms around him, tell him how much you love him, and take him to rehab." And he kicked and screamed and called me every name in the book, and he pointed his finger at me, and he's going to come back and kill me. A month later, he comes back, he said, "You were the only person who told me the truth, and that was the best advice you gave me. My son is now doing very well. He's clean and free of drugs, and he's doing very well." And to this day, that man he treats me like his son. So that's how long you have to deal with that stuff.
Yes, I deal with them for a very long time because of the Facebook and shares and videos that can be shared, and sometimes people pick up on one share that you did like 2 years ago, like it just happened, and that's very frustrating. But I have not had nearly as troubled time as you have. I've got a 6'4" photographer with me. That helps probably.
Yeah, I'm not that tall. Somebody mentioned about having a mean dog. My dog will pee on your leg. That's our watchdog at the office. So,
but in regard to addressing those sort of comments, I have a bad problem with immediately going after back at them, which my bosses try to work with me on not engaging because you won't win. But if you have enough passion about the story and you know enough about the story, it's very hard to just let it go. But you will never win with them, ever.
That's an excellent point. I mean, I've got probably 14 journalists who work for me and a bunch of sports writers, and they get the social media stuff all the time. And I say, do not engage, do not engage. There's no winning. You cannot win with a lunatic. You're trying to reason with people who are unreasonable. So if you work for me, that's the advice I'd continue to give you.
And they're trying to get it in. It's just hard.
I know. But you're passionate about it, and you're right, and you've got a point, and you want to make people see that side, and it's so frustrating.
And I wanted to hit on the lawsuits and the subject
go ahead.
too. Not in regard to us filing lawsuits. TV is very different than newspaper. I think in a lot, we have to move on faster, so we don't typically, get into those situations. It's not since I've been doing it. But we do get them quite a bit, and the way we handle it is basically we meet and our attorneys first go over the story. Usually, when one needs to be lawyered, so we send it up to them. They look over it, and then it comes down to, is it worth it? And typically, we had one story, which I can't even talk about because I know it's true, but I haven't been able to report on it. But we were right, and we had everything we needed. But our attorney said, I know we'll win the case, but this is not a motions case. This is going to go into discovery, which is going to be around $100,000. And our management was like, no. And so I crushed half my story that would have done really well just because of the threat of that. So that's a very frustrating angle from TV side of it is the balance of taking the risk to go on with a story that you're going to get sued, or there's a good chance of it, and I don't know if you deal with that same thing or if you just drop it. And that's hard on somebody who cares about all the work they've done to just drop the story and move on.
Abigail, have your nemesis gone away?
Oh, no. I get more by the day. They tend to, you can usually tell when someone's pretty serious. Like you said, after a few weeks, sometimes they'll move on. Being a weekly newspaper, I feel like you kind of have a lingering effect because that front page sits there for a good long week, which when you've done a really, really important but hard-hitting story, you kind of stare at that paper all week like, oh, I wish the kind of time would fly by a little bit more because you get a lot of angry phone calls. Lawsuits, those are probably the number one complaints and threats that I get. People just, and especially on Facebook, social media, wreck photos, people think that they have the right to demand things be taken down. That's probably what I've experienced more of than anything is an increase of people who think they have the right to demand information be left out, taken down, removed. And, newspapers, one of the most important parts is public records, marriages, divorces, lawsuits, everything. And people, for some reason in the last few years, it seems like they feel the right to demand that stuff be left out if it offends them or if it upsets. I had a woman call me, her son had been in a wreck, and we had posted a photo on our Facebook of it. It wasn't a distasteful photo. There were no bodies in it or anything like that. It was just a kind of a mangled car. And she said, well, my mother's going to see this and she's going to be upset. And as much as you feel for the people, you have to tell them, you avoid the news. If it's going to be a hard few days for you, don't go on Facebook looking for that type of stuff, because we're not going to be able to take it down just for you. So
A lot of people I hear with our employer or people that are trying to get a job, and as soon as you Google their name.
Right.
So I think we take it kind of on a case-by-case basis.
That's right. That's what I wrote on my note. It's case by case. Every case is different. And being a community journalist, there are certain situations you can work with people and, give them an opportunity to comment on a story that they may not have for a bigger publication. So.
Right.
My enemies all, and I know this is online somewhere, if they can see this, I know who you are, but I had a policy when I first took over the Todd County Standard, because when I was a kid and grew up there, I knew that there was some things left out of the paper because people asked for it. So I made a policy that if anyone in my family got in trouble, they went on the front page, including me. Yep. And so that didn't happen for a long time, but I had a nephew that decided that it would be a good idea to take a machete to school, I don't know why, and some liquor, and he got busted, and I put it on the front page. And normally we wouldn't have put that on the front page, but I put it on the front page because I had to, because I can always, it's difficult for your enemies to say, well, you're unfair, when you would do that to your own family, okay? Because sometimes, and I mean this, sometimes you have to do really painful things, and you have to report on very painful things, and you have to be fair, and you have to be balanced. And that doesn't mean Fox News. That means actual fairness and actual balance. And so it requires a lot of the time for you to do things that are painful. I've had people come in and weep about what we're about to print because they know what's coming. And you still have to do it anyway. And I will say this, though. Newspapers have something, and John probably could speak this even better than I could. The Kentucky Press Association has a legal defense fund. When we were suing the state over the records for the murdered girl that he spoke about earlier, we were fairly sure we couldn't pay those bills. And, well, we were more than sure we couldn't pay those bills because it was about to be a very long, drawn-out battle. Luckily for us, it was so heinous that the judges kind of just knocked it down as they went. It didn't cost us a dime. We won our legal fees. But the Kentucky Press Association had already promised to pay half of through the legal defense fund of what we were going to do. So we took that as as their support because the Cabinet for Family Health and Services had up to this point ran up, I don't know what, a couple $100,000 bill against the Courier-Journal and Herald-Leader in similar cases. So it was a real risk for a small weekly in Western Kentucky to do that, but sometimes you have to.
It's not unusual for a newspaper editor to take a call, I'm going to sue you, and my philosophy, I've told our reporters and I've told the editors under my direction when I had a few, when those words are said, then the conversation ends there. And then we contact our attorney, or in some cases in Kentucky, we'll contact the Kentucky Press Association attorneys, who I know is popular, one of whom I know is very popular with the local with the Progress staff is John Flyshaker. And KPA operates a hotline for its members who have questions about open records, open meetings, who have faced situations like this. And that call is free. And then if the lawsuit does occur, like Ryan was mentioned, they can apply to the Legal Defense Fund, which accumulates dollars from another program that the Press Association has. And a group of past presidents reviews those applications and decides whether to help pay for that lawsuit. And it's been a very valuable tool for all of our members. I'd like to move on to fake news. When the term first began to appear, we really didn't think that it had much effect on local media because, as as everyone has been saying, you know your readers and your readers know you. You're their neighbor. But as time has passed, I've been hearing more and more from local reporters and editors that they get that term thrown at them more often. And I'd like you guys just to jump in when you want and tell us of situations where you've been accused of fake news and how you dealt with it.
I have a great story. Fake news, in my opinion, is categorized two ways. Number one, news that people don't like that doesn't fit their agenda. Okay, so if we tell the truth and don't like it, they call it fake news. Okay, and she talks about all the social media nonsense and, oh, it's fake news. That's the term of the year is fake news. So if they don't like it, if it doesn't fit your agenda, it's fake news, we're idiots, we're jerks, and, you know, I'm canceling my subscription. Which, by the way, which is great, because when I've had officials call me and cancel their subscription because they didn't like what we wrote and they called us fake news. Well, they cancel the subscription, we give them their money back, and I write them a note and say, obviously, the city of whatever cannot afford the $68 for their subscription. Please accept this complimentary subscription on behalf of your favorite publisher, Jeff Vanderbeck. Enjoy it. And I get it. They actually send it back, says do not deliver or return to sender, and it just goes back. And then I'll hand deliver the thing to them just to piss them off because, you know what, you can't stop me from telling the news. So you call it fake news. The other part is absolute stuff that is made up. Now, 6 months ago, on a Sunday, everybody in Eastern Kentucky got a letter. Looked legit. It was a press release from this guy who said that in the Magic Mart building in Pike County, in Pikeville, they were going to build an LGBTQ church. It would have reclining leather pews, and it'd have a dance floor with multicolor stuff on it with Jesus's, the cross and the this, that, and the other thing. Very detailed on how it goes. Everybody picked up on it. So I called my editor. Now, usually Sundays are my fun days, and I'm usually off on Sunday, but I called my editor and I said, did you see that? He goes, yeah. So I called the mayor of the town that was supposed to happen. He goes, geez, Jeff, it's not real. It's fake. I says, well, where did this come from? He goes, it's that knucklehead who's just trying to stir the pot. Well, sure enough, they had everybody, every other news outlet had it out there, and I talked to my editor, and he's like, it's not real, it's not. Within 3 hours, everybody who put that on there, the next day they had comments. The communities were commenting about how this is going to tear the fabric of our society apart, and everybody's going to hell in a handbasket. And 3 hours later, the general manager of the respective TV stations and radio stations in my market put up a very stern apology on how they just had an intern put it together, and they just put it up there. And you know, my point is, and I tell my employees, I tell our editorial staff, I want you to be right than first. I don't care if you're not first. We're not going to be first a lot, but we are going to be right. And if you publish crap like that, that's a good way to get fired. So what I implore you to do is, if it comes from somewhere, I don't care and it looked legitimate. If you remember that,
yeah, that's cool.
Vet it. Call somebody. Call the mayor. Call the alleged call somebody, because just putting it out there just to be first was dead wrong, and it happens constantly where everybody wants to be first instead of right, and our position is we're going to be right than first. So that's how we deal with the fake news nonsense.
I think that happens a lot with the new producers on our end,
Right.
that just take a press release as the gospel.
No pun intended.
Yeah, I think that's a lot. A lot of this is learning, so that happens, but you've got to check.
You've been accused of fake news, Abigail?
Oh, yeah. I actually had a police chief accuse me of being fake news. It started on Facebook. Newspapers, typically, whenever you're doing an arrest story, it's pretty typical for you to take the address from the citation. So Houstonville, Stanford address, you say Stanford man arrested for blah, blah, blah. That was just the general practice that we always did. And the police chief was the police chief of a very small city in Lincoln County. And it's, I think, 200 residents is the population. It's very small. And I wrote a story about a large drug bust that was in the area, and it was a Houstonville address, the man that was arrested. So the headline was Houstonville man arrested for drugs, whatever. Well, the police chief was mad because he touts that the town is completely rid of drugs because of him. And he claims that you cannot refer to anyone as a Houstonville resident if they don't live in the 1.5-mile radius that actually constitutes the city. So anything in that area, he says there's no drugs there because that's his domain. And so I fought back a little bit and was like, this is how we do this. And I tried to explain calmly why we did that. We go by public record. The citation says this is your address. It's a Houstonville address. So he got on Facebook, posted a picture of the article, making sure that the IJ was seen in the photo, and just put fake news in big bold letters. And it got shared by the 200 residents of the town, I guess. And I didn't pay much attention to it, but I did continue to write the stories the same way, and I made it a point. You know, I might have missed a story or two before that, but I made sure to cover all Houstonville stories after that. And so I continued to write them. He continued to get mad and call us fake news. And it got to the point where the police chief was literally cussing me out on the phone. And at that point, did I call you, or I called the publisher? Yeah, I think I called John and was like, all right, well, this is probably going to hinder my ability to report here if he continues, because he stopped giving me any information at all. So I had to go to the mayor, talk to the mayor about it, and then he just started calling the male superiors above my head. He wouldn't even talk to me anymore. He just tried to get me fired.
I told him I was more scared of her than she was of him.
Yeah. Well, and I think Miranda could probably relate to this. As a female, I deal a lot with men have been going over my head to my male bosses. Instead of, you know, coming to me face to face and saying, I have a problem with what you wrote, they just try to get me fired. They go to the male superior thinking that, oh, he'll have my back, you know, get this woman on a leash here. And usually John or Ben would say, no, we're going to let her handle this. I think she's perfectly capable. So.
Well, yeah, and especially when you're doing the bigger stuff. And yeah, I feel like we're treated a lot differently from viewers as the males are.
I think that the prevalence of fake news has slowed down when it gets to the local level, mainly because they see the people there. You see the reporter at the fiscal court meeting, you see the reporter at the city council meeting, you see the sports reporter at the basketball games. That actually, I think, has proven to be true over the state, where you will have individuals get angry about certain stories and may say fake news. But I think overall, the people that read your local product, because they see you there, tend to trust it more. I have a weird idea about this, but I think that you could almost say that for some regional publications or TV stations, but once you get past that level to a statewide thing or a national organization, they don't see how they report. They don't know how they report. One thing I truly believe is that one of the challenges for all journalists is that the majority of the population is ignorant about how we actually go about gathering news. So we have a policy at the Todd County Standard that we record everything. I don't care if it's talking about, it could be the most benign story there is, we still record it. I've had to play back recordings for people that have said things in meetings that have said, well, I didn't say that. You have to play it for them to hear. We have also have a policy, if someone points to you in a meeting and says, don't print that, we put it in the lead. And so they have to know that you're there, you're on the ground, and I think that's why local products don't have as near as much problem with fake news. It permeates more in social media than it ever will about what you actually print. But I do think that, just my opinion traveling around the state, that once you get past the regional level, the statewide publications, the Herald Leader and the Courier Journal, they get the fake news argument all the time because they're seen as covering the state. You take one of these smaller dailies that covers a 2 or 3 county area, or a weekly that covers a county, it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. While it can be an issue, it's not as much, just simply because they see you there. I think it's an interesting, I guess, an interesting way to look at it. But I think education of the public on how we gather news is the most important thing to battle everyone thinking something they don't agree with is fake news.
You brought up a very good point about, you know, don't print that versus off the record. There's a huge difference between that. We get our sources and we talk to a lot of officials, and, you know, they'll say, listen, this is off the record, and, you know, pens down, recorders off. I have approached reporters before who wrote stories, and the subject would call me and say, that's not what I said. And I'll say, let me hear your tape, or let me see your notes. And if the notes match what's in there, I say, well, that's what you said. I've got it on tape, or that's exactly how it's written. I'm sorry, I can't help you. And these people are our customers, or, you know, good friends of mine, and that's it. And they cancel their ads or anything like that, and they do all that stuff, and they eventually come back. But they respect the fact that we have done our job. Now, when they say don't print that because it makes them sound like an idiot, well, like I said, that's the lead, you know. But when they say, hey, this is off the record, I just want to let you know we're going on a drug bust tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Be out there and be ready to go. And, you know, sure, we go out. I was on a drug bust a couple weeks ago. They rounded up, I think, 13 people on methamphetamines in my county, and they asked me to come with them. And of course, the first thing they did is they said, okay, do you got your piece with you? I said, of course I do. They said, here's your bulletproof vest. I'm like, what do I need that for? I'm like, well, duh, you shoot at people, they're going to shoot back at you. So, but the off-the-record stuff is very, very important. You gain credibility that way, and if you talk to people, you get great information from that. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, and stay friends with them.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
if there's a topic that you like, get involved in the topic, go do things with them, go to events when they're not working. I mean, just make yourself present and irreplaceable to them when it comes time for them to want to talk.
In a public meeting, though, I will say, there's no such thing as off the record in a public meeting.
Right.
Ever. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If they go in a closed session and they come back out and they don't do anything, but yet something's decided, that's also illegal. So you need to pay attention to that kind of thing. But there's nothing that can be said in a public meeting that's off the record, ever. They're not even really supposed to whisper. Like if we were up here and we were whispering to each other in a meeting, that's illegal as well, because public meetings are exactly what they are, public meetings. They're for the public, and they should be completely transparent. And a lot of times they really, I'll say this, if something very controversial is passed on a 5-0 vote and nobody discussed it, they probably broke the law by discussing it before they walked into the room. And you need to call them out on that. Those are the kind of things I think that especially on a local level, that they expect out of their local paper, their local news outlet. They expect that. That's what the citizens expect, for you to actually be watching for that. But yeah, if the school board decides to raise taxes and no one talked about it, obviously they've broken the law because they've talked about it.
I'm going to ask Ryan to address one more issue, and then we'll have a Q&A. But first, I want to say, don't take all of this negativity about us getting threatened and everything as
It's fun most of the time.
We do this job because we love it, and it has its pluses and its minuses. And I was once handed a blank sheet of paper by a guy from the Poynter Institute, and he said, I want you to write on this piece of paper why you do this job and save it for your family. I didn't do that, but I wrote a longer piece than he wanted me to later on. But I think the gist of it is that we love our communities, and we love our state, and we love our country, and we appreciate having the privilege of being able to do our job in a place where the First Amendment stands strong. And so we like what we do despite how we talk about it sometimes. I want to ask Ryan to update us on the status of what many of you may be familiar with, and that's a lawsuit that the University of Kentucky has filed against its student newspaper. You may also know that, the same thing has happened at Western over the same issue. I believe Eastern has handled, the administration here has handled it a lot differently than those two schools did. But Ryan, bring us up to date on where that lawsuit is.
The lawsuit, and for those who may not be familiar, basically there was a professor that had been accused of impropriety. He had either touched or made inappropriate passes to two of his students. The two students themselves came to the Kentucky Colonel, so you have to understand this kind of worked in reverse. After the Kentucky Colonel had started writing stories, they asked for the records for this professor and found out he was allowed to resign, which you're going to run into that, excuse me, you're going to run into that a lot, where to get around you looking at their, because he works for a public institution, his personnel file, except for redacted material, should be open. He's paid by the taxpayers. So there should be a record of what he did wrong and all this, but instead, by allowing him to resign, there was no official investigation or no final investigation. The Kentucky Colonel, of course, asked for these records. The Attorney General said we should have these records. It should have been open and shut kind of case. The problem being is that universities now have decided that this is a privacy issue, that we can't report the story without compromising the privacy of these two students. And I pointed out earlier, they came to the Kentucky Colonel, and we had already printed stories by this point. This is a battle with the universities over who controls the flow of information. Also, it's a battle over, when they say privacy, they say, well, we're going to lose funding and things like that. I disagree with that argument, but I do get what they're saying is that they need to basically have a judge say, oh, well, you can turn these files over so no one from the federal government can come in and say, well, you're violating privacy or any Title IX issues that may be there. So UK, basically, and Western Kentucky University are protecting the brand. Don't think that's anything but what this is about. It's not about the privacy of students, because that really wasn't an issue in the first place. And it's not about the privacy of what can be redacted. And I'll give you an example. The University of Kentucky also sued Kentucky State University for something similar, just as basically an exercise in the First Amendment. We had a little bit of a battle. The Attorney General ruled against them. Instead of taking us through circuit court and battling with us for the next 5 years, they decided to give us the records redacted. This was a banned professor, director, I think they're both, up at KSU that basically had inappropriate text and conversations and touching with banned students over the years. There were multiple women involved in this. They gave us a redacted file eventually. We are going to very soon, if not sooner, depends on what happens with the Kentucky versus Kentucky Colonel case, but we have the redacted material, and what we can do is write a very well done story based upon this redacted material without their names, their addresses. All we really have is we know they were in that program. To the Attorney General and to Kentucky State University, there's no violation of these students' privacy. Honestly, I'll be honest with you, when this happened, there's no way those students are still at that university anyway, because you know how it is when you battle things out in court.
Ryan, where is the lawsuit in the process? Is it in?
It's in the lawsuit with us. The reason I say that is in the appellate system. There will probably be a ruling this term. We had oral arguments in front of the last fall in front of the appellate court, and basically at the end of the day, there was one of the judges got unelected and didn't file his ruling, so we had to start over. And so this spring, we're back in front of them. They didn't ask for oral arguments. They're going to use the arguments from the fall to make their decision. We expect it any time now. But just to be honest with you, no matter what happens, we expect it to move on to the Supreme Court.
I'll add that the Kentucky Press Association's Legal Defense Fund has assisted the University of Kentucky and Western
And SPJ.
with their legal expenses, along with the Bluegrass SPJ chapter has given several $1,000s as well. So that precipitated this year at the Kentucky Press Association's 150th anniversary, the naming of the most valuable member was, it was all student journalists in Kentucky. So that was a big moment. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists? Yes, sir.
My question was for Ms. Holmes. You replied to that guy and like whatever you said we have, and it really was, so I got into this, I don't know if I'll call it feud, but I'm not a journalist or whatever, but this was over like a soccer team. And I got into it with this guy on Twitter. And basically at the end of it, I ended up becoming a troll. And so I had to look at if I were ever to take like a job being a journalist, and I'm very like quick to do that too. So like, where do you draw the line in between like responding and defending yourself and like becoming a troll?
I think you can easily separate the two because you can just tell in the way they act. And a lot of times people come back to your page and they quit and they get on you and come back. I mean, those are the creepers that we're gonna, or is that a troll? I don't even know the right term, but those are the people that I just don't even engage, right? But the ones that think they have a valid point and I'm wrong and I know I'm right, I tend to come back at them. And then if we go more than 2 rounds, I'm done. You know, that's typically, like the rehab, I never heard back from him. Another lady was telling me that I only tell negative stories. This was just last week, only do negative stories on the drug epidemic. And so I said, Google Miranda Combs WKYT drug epidemic. I just did, and I found 36 stories, and I stopped. So never heard back from her. So if you're very confident about your message, you would disagree. But
No, I agree.
Yeah. Then I think it's okay to spar to a degree, but you have to be the one to stop it. Don't keep going down the drain with them.
I want to add to that because I think that's another negative about social media is people don't get the full picture. I tell people all the time, if you want to criticize the newspaper, read a full issue of it before you do that, because page 1 through 18, you get the full stories, whereas on Facebook, you're only seeing this story from 2 weeks ago, that story from 2 months ago. You're not getting a full picture of what's being covered.
Well, and a lot of the stuff with the drug epidemic in particular is ever changing.
Exactly.
So a story that we did back 3 years ago may not be correct,
Right.
but that's what we knew at the
It
time.
was then.
Right.
Yeah, so people will find the old ones and think that's what I just did.
And some people will see that story and not see the follow-up
That's
that
what
you
happens to
did
me all the
about
time.
them going to rehab or being reunited with their families.
Well, I always advised, at one time I supervised a small staff of reporters at a daily newspaper, and I did not want any of them to engage with someone like that without talking to me first. And so if you have a supervisor or someone who has some perspective that you can talk to before you enter into that kind of a back and forth, it's wise.
At the Kentucky Kernel, we pretty much have a policy. The students do not engage till they've spoken to their editor or maybe the advisors. But we do try, and honestly, through engagement, we were able to give a heads up that there was going to be a hunger strike, that there was going to be a sit-in, and all those did get results. But you know, they're not all just screaming crazy in the woods. Some of them do, but you really do have to be careful about engagement. And at UK, those students, college educated. They argue in a way different way than you see other places on social media. So it's interesting the level of engagement that you can allow yourself on a collegiate level that you would probably not even at a professional level.
And sometimes when you engage, it's not always negative, and they know you're reading them, which makes a big difference because they know,
Yeah.
right? They know it's getting across.
And, you know, she mentioned she did 36 stories on the opioid. I mean,
I mean,
nobody,
it's just like what I
Yeah.
immediately,
nobody's been that close to that. I mean, you're intimate with it. I mean, you're intimate with it. You've been that close, you know that, so you're kind of an expert on what's going on. And, you know, when I talk to our folks, you know, they're very informed about what they're doing, because that's the requirement. They have to do their research and their background. So if somebody brings up a point, like you mentioned on Twitter, you know, I encourage my people to take a look at that. I mean, is the point that they're saying valid, or are they just saying, hey, you're a stupid jerk and you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking? That you leave alone. But the other stuff that says, hey, listen, maybe you missed this point, blah, blah, blah. And I encourage my people to kind of engage to a point where we, A, can learn something, or B, where it gets to a point where they're not learning anything more and they're getting belligerent, then just cut them off. And I always encourage the people with attitudes to call us, because once they start talking, you probably have all found this out, once they start talking to you and they realize either, A, they're not seeing the picture the way that you see it, as intimate as you are, and see a different perspective, and that's it, or B, they realize how really stupid they sound. And then they just hang up and they say, well, you know, to heck with it. So that's the way. But going back to, you know, your point on Twitter, you get into a big Twitter battle, your employer will probably research that and find out what your thing is. And if that employer has a very stern policy on not engaging, you could be out of a job. So I really encourage you guys to watch what you put on social media.
Anybody else?
You talk about fake news, but what about the term that also popped up, alternative facts?
yeah, that's pretty insulting, I guess, too.
That goes back to the information that we are receiving and we're reporting not fitting a specific agenda of the person who wants it to be recorded or reported in their way, okay? We talked about a public meeting. You know, you go to a public meeting and a public official says A, B, and C. We report A, B, and C, and they say, that's not what I said. And then we had this not too long ago. We had a public official go to a meeting and say, this is what the fiscal court told me to do. They told me to cheat on my expenses and so on and so forth. So of course, you know, that was our lead. The fiscal court told this official to cheat on it. Well, she didn't like what we wrote. And then she said, it's alternative facts, it's fake news. And she goes to the other media outlet in our community, and the other media, and gives them 15 minutes, and they go on there, and she gives her 15 minutes of fame. And they said that we lied. What the other media outlet did not do is play the tape from the fiscal court. We put it on our website in the fiscal court where she said, yes, they told me not to tell the truth in my, I'm like, how much wrong can this be? So I said, you know, we got to stop defending ourselves.
Well, and to your point about fake news or alternative news, we have done more to where we start putting our whole interview, our raw interview online, so you can see every exchange that's made in certain, I mean, if it's a 20-minute interview, that's ridiculous, but most of them, just so you know, we're pulling straight, because there's such distrust, especially, I think, for TV news.
Alternative facts started over an argument about how many people were in a photo. Don't forget that. And that's not, you know, and I think that's the real issue is that people are going to look at things differently. But when you're dealing facts, they're actual facts. I mean, and there's no such thing as an alternate set of them. That's like when I was in college and everybody had to read that statistics book, How to Lie with Numbers. And journalists are I think, always having to be, we hate math. Man, I hate math. But you have to be aware that people will give you statistics and numbers basically in an effort to fool you. And that, to me, is the OG, or, you know, alternate facts, because they really, there's a lot of lying there with their numbers to try to fit whatever they're trying to push at you. So you have to be diligent with that as well.
Anyone else?
Is there a challenge compared to, let's say, 30 years ago, with the fact that now, with the internet, with social media, with all these different outlets, people can now just filter out any voice that they don't like, be it the truth or not, as long as it reinforces their beliefs? And how do you fight that?
I pushed our newspaper product more than anything because that's the complete picture. Like I said, you can get online and get bits and pieces of it, but ultimately I always sent readers back to the actual newspaper because it is a complete picture of the community.
One thing, oh, go ahead. One thing I hate about social media is back in the day when it was competitive with reporters and you wanted to be the first. Now nobody is. They're just going to immediately put it on Twitter or Facebook, and nobody really has like a breaking story anymore. It's all just there. Yeah.
30 years ago, a journalist actually had to go and do hardcore research, and you couldn't do it quickly. In other words, if you tell me a specific fact, like in 1972, Leonard Skinner was, their plane crashed, I can Google that, find out when their plane crashed. But 30 years ago, I couldn't do that. I'd have to go back to old articles. I'd have to go to this thing called the library and check that out and find out when that actually happened. So it prevents it from being as quick as it is now. So it's a challenge for us because, like I said, I'd rather be right than first than wrong.
Mm-hmm. My greatest accomplishment pre-internet everything was that I had a mother who was worried about her son who just literally disappeared. And I tracked him down to a rehab center for homeless people in Atlanta, Georgia, from Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I did that without the internet or a cell phone. And it just took gumshoe work, getting on the ground, asking people where he went, things like that. To be completely honest with you, we're too reliant a lot of times on, especially reporters, on electronic files and things like that. When we thought we may get denied yet again the files for the little murdered girl, her home life and stuff like that, we started working it from the ground up. We talked to the people at Newer. We talked to the people who, the social workers that would talk to us. We talked to our school nurse. We were about to build the story from reverse without a single record. It's tough for journalists to do that now. But you can work your sources and get a story and not ever turn your computer on, I promise.
I remember when there actually were typewriters in the newsroom.
I don't even remember that.
And when cut and paste was a literal term that actually meant scissors and glue.
You literally cut and paste.
And I won't lie to you. This information superhighway, this broad ability to get information anywhere you want to get it, has been scary for me. Even as someone who is a champion, I hope you would think of me as a champion of the First Amendment. I feel like sometimes that there are, we used to be called the gatekeepers of the news, and there are no longer no gates, there are no fences. And so it's hard to imagine how we're going to get control of this abuse of facts or non-facts. And the only way I know of in the small communities, we have a little bit of advantage because there are only so many media outlets in our community. There's a newspaper, maybe a radio station, maybe a television station, and so it's easier to approach those problems than it is in the larger markets. But it's still a problem, and it's a scary one, and I don't know how, from my perspective, how we're going to get past it unless we begin to slow down and educate ourselves and have people look at information that they don't agree with necessarily as well. Any more questions?
What advice would you give to some of these budding future media professionals and journalists who have, because of the nature of our society, a fear of face-to-face? So I texted them, I emailed them, they didn't call me back, I've done my job. When are you going to have to actually go physically talk to them? On the phone?
I've got a rule at my house when my kids come over and we have dinner, the phones stay in the pantry. And we actually do this thing, we have dinner and we talk to each other. and we intercommunicate, and it opens up a whole different thing. The college president, when he met my son, his wife said, you know, geez, he's the first student in 20 years who looks me in the eye, shook my hand, and said, it's nice to meet you. Having that interpersonal relationship is vitally important. Looking somebody in the eye, right, wrong, good, bad, I don't care what you could look a criminal in the eye, you could look, you know, a senator in the eye, you could look the pastor in the eye, you look a professor in the eye and shake their hands and look at it. Put the damn phone down, put the electronic stuff down, look them in the eye. You mentioned earlier, listen, you hear a lot of bad things. Every industry is bad. We are here for a reason. She turned over a case where 1,400 families got screwed by a car dealer. These people should be carrying her through the cities of Lexington, the streets of Lexington, saying, thank you for uncovering this. You should have went home that day and felt like you're on cloud nine, and you should have ended your career, and whoever you work for should have said, listen, that's good enough. I mean, and those are the kind of things that keep us going. It's fantastic to do our job. So do that and look people in the eye.
I tell my students, and I'll say this to the students here as well, you need to find someone you're remotely comfortable with and just ask them their life story. No phones, but get a recorder so you can hear how you sound and record it. One thing, if you don't want to be nervous in a big interview, say you've got a really big interview coming, put 2 recorders down. Turn them both on, cell phone, whatever. And I've had people say, why do you have 2? Well, one of them's for you. And it's just that extra layer of assurance of what's going on. But honestly, you need to practice. You need to practice now. Most of you probably, I would say, are on a scale of 10 or probably a 2 to 3, maybe a 4 if you're lucky, on interviewing skills for interpersonal communication. I see it at UK. I'm pretty sure it's the same here. It will further you in both life and your career to practice now. Find someone that does, you know, just interview them about their life, start their baby steps. Then the next interview you do, make sure that it's just you and them. If you've never had a professional journalist grill you for an hour, you don't know what life really is like. So, I mean, I've had people go in very confident and go out weeping like a baby because they did not understand what it's like to be with someone that will engage everything they say and come back with them with questions. It's very difficult to do, and it's a skill you need to pick up now.
And I always think, the way I go about it is I never take questions in unless it's the President of the United States that we got to interview last year. I had questions with me there. But for the most case, if you have questions in front of you, all you're doing is focusing on that next question, and you're not thinking about what they're saying. So you're not in a conversation with them. It's a question, answer. And I've had multiple people say to us, because Bart, my photographer, will just set up as we're getting ready, and he'll just give me a look, and I'll know he's going, and they'll be like, the interview's over? And I'll be, yeah, and they didn't even realize it was happening because it was just a conversation.
That's always been my approach, is it's a conversation. So, you know, I always, if I'm recording, I have it right here, but I'm not looking at it. And I don't make eye contact with my recorder. I don't look at my phone to check it. I make full eye contact the whole time, give them their full attention. And I think there's something lost in text and email. Body language can tell you a whole lot about someone's response. And it can lead to 10 more questions just by how they react to a certain question you ask.
It can also lead to 100 more words.
Yes.
In writing, you can describe their reactions
Absolutely.
to questions and the way they provided answers.
And multiple sources, too. Try to have multiple sources. Not one source stories are the devil.
And one thing is, don't be afraid to ask the uncomfortable question. I mean, they have to be accountable. The reason why you're interviewing the subject is because you've got questions, and you want answers because your job is to find out what's going on. So don't be afraid to ask the uncomfortable questions. They may not be willing to answer them, and then that gives you just like, and that's an excellent, Miranda brought up an excellent point. Don't read off a list, because then you're just concentrating on that. However, if you're thinking and engaging with a subject, and they don't like the question that you're asking, and they answer it, And you'll look at some of these really professional journalists, they'll ask the same question. Politicians are great. Say, what do you think about the wall? Well, I think that the Democrats and the, well, that's not what we asked you. I asked you, what do you think about the wall? Well, the Democrats this and the Republicans, that's not what we, and the good journalists will continue to do that until either A, the subject answers the question about the wall, or they say something and they say, well, obviously you're not going to answer the question the way that, you know, we asked you, so thank you for your time, have a great day, and then you know. So don't ever be afraid to ask the tough questions.
Anything else?
I will add, though, I do get a lot of news tips on every platform of communication, like Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Messenger.
Gentleman back here has another question.
What if they pull a Kellyanne Conway? Do you know who that is? Speaker. Because I'm personally a fan. Because she can say so much without literally saying anything. And at the end, like, it makes the reporter look rude. Because then they're asking, literally, they're like, well, what about the wall? And then she's talking, and it just makes you seem rude, like, to infringe on her.
The administration spend billions of dollars so that everybody says the same thing. They can ask you, is the sky blue, and they'll talk about the agenda. I'm sorry, I didn't
Talking
interrupt.
point.
I did get to interview her last year, and she, if it's something that you agree you're passionate about or you understand, at least where they're coming from, whether they disagree or agree, it still goes back to that more of a conversation feel instead of a, what do you think about the wall? You know, I mean, it's still, if you've just got to know your subject before you go in and then just play.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
With all of the horrible stories that were told at the beginning of this panel, would you say that the more rewarding moments like outweigh the bad moments, or would you say they're just about even?
Absolutely, the rewarding moments, I mean, it's fun. I mean, this is a fun thing. There's nothing more I like than a state representative coming up to me in a crowded restaurant and wanting to kick my ass out in the parking lot. Because you know what that does? Every person in that restaurant bought my paper that Sunday to see my column because he wanted to know what I wrote about that state representative. He's not going to do it. If he was going to do it, have you ever been in a fight before? Hell no, you're 6'9", aren't you? If you've ever been in a fight before, they're not going to tip you off and say, I'm going to beat you up in the parking lot. They're just going to start punching or shooting or stabbing you, okay? If they're going to threaten you like that, they're idle. It's an idle threat, and you just don't worry about it. It's funny. You laugh at this kind of stuff, and that's what fuels us. And you go back, just like we talked about, you go back and you think about how do we strategize it? How do we question this? How do we look at this thing going forward? And we have a big game plan. Thank God I've got a fantastic editor, because I write stuff that is off the wall about our politicians, and he, you know, just like we talked, no, that's going to get you sued. I said, I don't care. You know, put it out there anyway. I've got proof, I got this, and sure enough, my editor will reel me back in. But for the most part, it's the most rewarding thing, like these guys talked about, because for every person that hates your guts, there's 10 people that come up to you and say, you're doing a great job on a school board, give them hell. Yep. All right, or, you know, I really like what you said about the fiscal court, and, you know, it's really a mess. I keep reading the paper because of that. Or you know, the city of Martin is a mess, and thanks for recording that stuff because we didn't know. And if they don't know this stuff, and if we're not doing our jobs, those entities are going to steal your money blind. So when we're able to thwart that process or educate public officials on how to do their jobs so that they can be more accountable to the taxpayers, like I said, she should be paraded through the streets of Lexington saying, thank you very much for helping us not get ripped off by these mean people anymore. So
Well,
it's rewarding.
And I think I've learned over the past 6 years that this isn't about gotcha journalism, or especially from an investigative standpoint. It's really about helping people that can't help themselves. Thank you for that. But I'm proud of the stuff we've done recently with the doctor out of Winchester who was high in the operating room. I've never been so devastated, and kept me up at night at how can I fix this? Because these people didn't even have internet. Like, they didn't even know how to find another orthopedic surgeon. He was it for them, and he took advantage of these people that were low income to get their Medicaid, and it hurts me so bad that our medical licensure board Doesn't care.
Yeah. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, so that's probably the first one that's got me, but it's also the first one that made me realize that we're much bigger than just showing up on TV and knocking on doors. Like, people really trust us to tell them, to help them more than anything else. They just want help.
I think we're going to have to wrap this up.
Thank you all for coming, and please give our panel a round of applause.
Well, as we can see, being a journalist is no easy task. We're super thankful for our panel today and all the great stories and experiences they shared with us. For The Progress, I'm Lauren Berger.